Chapter 29, The Majestic Imperial General Leo.
Locke. Are you coming? Coming, Chere, hold up.
With that, Locke stood up and began to walk towards Chere and Strago, dusting off his hands as he looked back at the golden statuettes, a gleam of awe in his eyes. Somewhere there were 3 life-sized versions of these goddesses, each brimming with unbelievably strong magical powers that could easily destroy the world as they knew it. He shook his head a little and sighed. Just a few months ago, his biggest priority in life was deciding which of his ill-received relics he wanted to sell off so that he could eat. Now it had immediately upgraded to protecting the goddesses from Kefka so that the world keeps from collapsing in on itself. Oh, but not only just that. He also had multiple girl issues at the moment. But little did he know, he would soon also have another large, sticky, purple problem on his hands.
Let's go through here,
Chere said, pointing to the exit just a few yards from them. Strago nodded, and with that, they proceeded on.
Ha ha ha. Crash. Ah.
Suddenly, from midair, a disgruntled and heavy Ultros fell from the ceiling of the cave that he had been stealthily crawling across, upside down, I might add, which is quite the feat for an octopus, for some time. His plan to quickly and efficiently eliminate the returners by a surprise attack had been cut short when one of his arms lost its grip on the ceiling, causing him to tumble down right on top of his shocked targets.
Ack, get it off!
Chere cried, and with a mighty shove, heaved Ultro's squirming form off of herself, Locke, and Strago. Strago sputtered and spat the dirt from his mouth as he climbed to his feet, and Locke glared at Ultros hatefully, rubbing the dirt from his cheeks. Ultros glared back with his ugly, crooked, yellow grin, but moments later, his golden gaze caught sight of something much more pleasing to the eye, the set of 3 statuettes on the raised land platform. You could practically see the drool glimmering from the corner of his fangs as he looked over the priceless treasure. He suddenly forgot about the returners, and rubbed his 2 front tentacles together menacingly.
Gee ha ha ha! These shiny statues are all mine! These'll get Siegfried's attention! Who's Siegfried?
Chere whispered, and Locke shrugged. Strago blinked and stared at the octopus. It was unlike anything he had ever seen in his entire monster hunting career.
Oh!
Ultros cried happily, slowly making his way towards them.
They're glowing! They're beautiful! Hey Squid Ball!
Locke suddenly barked, putting his hands on his hips.
Don't you ever learn?
Ultros turned back to the thief and laughed, shaking his head.
Well, they always said I was a slow learner. But I eat fast.
With that, Ultros suddenly lashed out at Locke with one of his arms, striking the thief with such sudden force that it knocked him to the ground with a loud thump. Locke moaned out and clenched his eyes shut tightly, reaching down to rub his aching back.
I was just thinking of you!
Ultros exclaimed eagerly.
I have more lives than I do arms! Locke!
Chere cried, and Strago stared at Ultros.
What is this thing?
He asked, and Ultros laughed.
I am Ultros, Octopus Royalty Extraordinaire,
declared he.
And you should know, old man, that becoming a returner has ultimately sealed your fate to be destroyed by me.
Strago raised his eyebrows and blinked.
Young man, you are very disrespectful.
Ultros widened his eyes and nearly fell over at that remark. Chere took the opportunity to draw her sword and come running at the fiend. However, Ultros spotted her and snickered a bit as he raised another arm in her way, causing her to trip and fall to the ground, her sword clattering away to the side.
Hope I'm not making a nuisance of myself.
Ultros smirked, and began to crawl back to the statuettes.
So sorry. Aquarake!
Strago cried, but was shocked when nothing came of his spell. Ultros laughed louder and shook an arm teasingly.
Forget it, Gramps. I'm in my tri-elemental form now. Your petty magic can do nothing to me.
With a sudden leap, a small figure jumped from the darkness and hopped onto Ultros's head, a light giggle emerging from its mouth as it leaped down from the octopus and in front of Strago. Ultros began to let out a string of curses as the figure brushed itself off and waved its hands in the air.
Grandpa, I'm here! Realm!
Strago shrieked, beginning to jump up and down in anger.
I told you to stay home!
The little girl smiled and pushed her hat further up on her head, reaching in her pocket and revealing a shining paintbrush.
I just couldn't miss a chance to practice my painting!
She exclaimed, and with that, skipped over to Ultros.
Say, sweetie, who are you?
Ultros widened his eyes and snarled.
How dare you call me sweetie? I'm Ultros!
Locke moaned as he struggled back to his feet and stared at the girl and the octopus hashing it out with each other.
Realm and Ultros! What are you doing? Listen, Ulti!
Realm began, and smiled brightly.
Why don't you pose for me? I'm not one of your kitty friends!
Ultros cried, and grew angrier.
Don't talk to me as if I were! I don't want a portrait!
Realm widened her eyes and cast her head down, letting out a small sob.
Forget it! I don't want to paint it anymore!
With that, Realm turned away and began to walk towards the edge of the cave floor they were battling on, letting out another sob as she looked down into the damp and dark empty layers of cave beneath her feet.
I'll just jump down here, where I won't be a bother to anyone!
Strago screeched and Chere leapt up, running to the girl's side. She wrapped her arms around Realm and looked deeply into her eyes.
No! You cannot do that!
Chere cried, but Realm suddenly put on a smile and winked at Chere as she leaned in and whispered something into her ear. Chere blinked and smiled, nodding a little as she pulled away and gently squeezed Realm's shoulder. Locke and Strago looked at each other, and Ultros tapped one of his arms impatiently. Chere walked back over to Ultros and gave him a harsh smack across the face.
How dare you bother that little girl?
Chere scolded.
I'm not going to forgive you if she hurts herself.
Ultros was suddenly overcome with a look of shame, and his smirk melted from his face.
Well, what do you want me to do?
He stammered, and Locke, finally catching the drift of things, walked to Cere's side.
Ask her to draw your portrait,
Locke suggested.
She might actually make you look pleasant.
Ultros groaned and looked down at the ground. Locke crossed his arms over his chest and glared.
Don't be so heartless.
Ultros sighed and still continued not to say a word.
Oh, all right. Uncle Ulti really wants you to do his portrait.
Realm giggled and skipped back over to Ultros, pushing Locke and Chere aside as she leaned in and pulled out her paintbrush again.
"You're gonna love it,"
Strago grumbled and shook his head.
"At any rate, do it back here."
Realm, Chere, and Locke joined Strago's side once more, and Realm took a few steps ahead of their line, closing her eyes as she concentrated, causing her paintbrush to glow. Chere and Locke gasped as the paintbrush began to glitter in dozens of different colors, and watched as Realm painted a perfect picture of Ultros right in the air in front of them. When the portrait was completed, it had become a mirror image of the octopus. With a low growl, one of the picture's arms suddenly reached out and smacked Ultros hard across the cheek. Ultros cried out and fell back a bit, shaking his head.
"That's incredible!"
Chere gasped, and Locke began to stammer.
"WWW wow! Maybe she has some magic in her after all."
Strago did not look surprised, but still kept a watchful eye on his grandchild to see what she would do next. Ultros began to sniffle, and rubbed at his eyes.
"How can this be? I'm truly nothing more than a stupid octopus."
With that, he let out a final sob and disappeared in an array of bubbles and smoke.
"Hey-yi!"
Realm exclaimed, and began jumping up and down in victory, her painting disappearing along with Ultros.
"Did you see me? I was awesome! Wouldn't I be more helpful than Gramps?" "Gee Gramps!"
Strago cried.
"Young lady!"
Chere laughed a little.
"I suppose it wouldn't hurt to have you along. You are quite powerful, for a little girl." "Yeah, I know,"
Realm exclaimed, soaking all the praise in like a sponge.
"Okay, okay,"
Strago cried.
"If you insist." "That's better,"
Realm cheered, and ran over to her grandfather's side.
"Did you really think that I was gonna stay home? I should have known better." "Geez."
Locke trailed off as he and Chere followed behind Strago and Realm into the next area, which looked empty, but also contained a trap, door-like looking object buried into the ground. He kneeled down to fiddle with it as Strago and Realm wandered about to make sure there were no other exits.
"What?"
Chere smiled, and kneeled down next to him.
"I dunno,"
Locke admitted, and laughed a little.
"She's gonna be a handful, that's for sure." "I know,"
Chere sighed dreamily.
"Makes me want to."
She trailed off, and Locke looked up at her as he opened the latch of the door, sliding it open.
"Hey, let's go!"
Realm suddenly screamed, bolting past Strago and diving down into the trap door. Strago let out a growl and stomped over to the trap door, leaning in to peer down. However, it was far too dark to see anything.
"That little brat!"
Strago cried.
"It's okay, we had to go down there anyway."
Chere tried to comfort him, but was interrupted by a loud scream belonging to the girl.
"Realm!"
Locke called, and with that, leapt down after her. The fall wasn't very long, and Locke easily landed on his feet as he peered around in the dim area. He spotted Realm a few feet ahead of him. He also spotted something else, something frightening, with a pair of outspread wings. There were even more creatures behind it, all in hushed silence as they laid their eyes on Locke and Realm. However, looking among the crowd, Locke could see that some of them were strangely familiar.
"Are these espers?"
Realm trailed off. The creature in front of her reached out a hand, but Realm screamed and ran away, right into Locke's arms. Chere and Strago appeared moments later, Chere immediately pushing past the others and going up to the creature that had startled Realm.
They are espers.
She trailed off.
But I didn't think they would look so. Gramps!
Locke cried, and pushed Realm over to him.
Take Realm and clear out of here.
Strago, for once, didn't argue, and took hold of Realm's hand as they began to walk towards the back of the area, where a small exit had been erected. However, more espers suddenly appeared through it, all staring at Strago and Realm as they blocked their path. Realm let out a frightened whimper, and a clear, strangely familiar voice rang out through the caves.
Halt!
With that, a pale white esper emerged from the crowd in front of Chere, one that had a most definite resemblance of the human it once was before it was transformed by the statues. However, Locke found that he recognized this very esper from when he and the others had gotten to magically view how Madonna and Meduin first met and fell in love. He was Meduin's youthful friend, the gatekeeper named Chere. Chere and Chere stared intensely at each other, and blue auras began to surround each of their bodies, causing Realm to cling tighter onto Strago.
What are they doing?
She cried, and Strago shook his head.
I sense some immense magical power in Chere.
It
frightens me. Oh gods, is she going to go ballistic again?
Locke gasped, but suddenly, the aura faded, and Chere parted his lips to speak once more.
You're somehow different.
Chere trailed off, his voice saddening.
I sense a familiar power radiating from you. Yes.
Chere nodded, and bit down on her lip.
Do you recognize me, Chere? I am the daughter of Meduin and Madonna. Stolen away from your world 18 years ago.
Chere gasped and leaned in, studying the features of Cere's face.
You do not lie. You truly are Meduin's daughter. So, you survived the Empire's raid. But your father and your mother, they are no longer of this world.
Chere replied softly.
But the Empire still remains, as strong as ever. Are you the espers of the sealed gate?
Strago suddenly cut in, and Chere looked away from Chere to the old man.
As a rule, we are not allowed to visit to your world. We few had gathered near the gate, and were wondering how we could save the espers that had been kidnapped. It was just a coincidence that Chere appeared when she did. I felt your presence through the gate.
Chere admitted.
We bolted the moment Chere opened the gate. But once in your world, we lost control of our powers. We completely leveled a city and took some innocent lives.
Chere gasped and tugged on Cere's arm.
That's what happened to me.
Chere cried.
At one point in time, I lost all control of my powers. I was so frightened.
Chere sighed and reached up, gently running his fingers through the loose strands of hair that had fallen from Cere's ponytail.
There must be something in your world that allows you to focus your power differently.
Strago explained.
You must use caution while in our world. We are deeply sorry for causing you humans such suffering and pain.
Chere apologized sadly.
The past is history,
Locke explained gently, and walked up to Chere and Chere.
However, the Empire seems to want to talk peace with you. Why not come with us? They would forgive us so easily.
Chere questioned, and Locke nodded.
Chere, let's take Chere and the others to Thamasa and talk to General Leo. Surely, he'll know what to do. That's a good idea.
Chere nodded.
Will you come, Chere? General Leo is one of the kindest men I've met, and I am sure he will be eager to meet you, my father's friend. I will come with you.
Chere agreed.
Please, lead the way.
With that, the espers blocking the exit parted, and Strago, Realm, and Locke began to make their way out of the cave. Just as Chere turned to leave herself, Chere took a hold of her shoulder, letting out a saddened sigh.
Chere. Honestly, it aches my heart to know that Meduin and Madonna cannot see how beautiful you have grown.
Chere looked down and folded her hands together.
Chere. You know, somewhere, Mother and Father are looking down upon the both of us. Is that so?
Chere blinked.
But how, Chere?
Chere looked up at Chere, and smiled a little.
Humans here believe in a realm called heaven.
Chere explained.
It is a place where a good person's soul goes when it dies, so that it can live again in paradise among the gods and watch over the souls it left behind on earth. I am sure that Meduin and Madonna are there right now, watching. This is a story that seems familiar, something that I may have once knew but forgot.
Chere said, and sighed.
This, among so many other things. I know how you feel.
Chere nodded, and gently tugged on Cere's hand.
But please. Let's hurry and get to Thamasa. You'll feel better once we've talked with Leo. Yes.
Chere confirmed, and turned to the other espers in the cave.
Let us go to Thamasa. Everyone, please, refrain from using your powers, as we no longer have anything to fear among the humans.
The cave erupted into a burst of loud cheers and whistles.
Celes.
Celes mumbled, turning from the small garden of flowers she had been staring at in front of a house in Thamasa. Leo smiled, and pointed towards the entrance of the town, where Chere, Locke, an elderly man, and a young girl were leading a band of unusual creatures. The townspeople, beyond freaked out, squealed and ran into their homes and shops, locking their doors tightly. In just moments, the town became empty and almost ghost-like. Leo gently patted Celes's head and began to walk towards the others, while Celes stared at the returners from her safe distance, her heart nearly leaping out of her chest in pure ecstasy. Chere and Locke were alive. They weren't lost in the fire after all. She couldn't believe her divine luck. However, Celes also remembered what had happened when she tried to say sorry to Locke on the ship, and felt her heart sink again. At this, she decided to just stay where she was, and not greet them.
General Leo.
Locke began, and Leo smiled happily as he ran up to him.
Locke. You're back. And alive. Of course.
Locke smirked, not able to help wanting to take a stab at gloating for glory in front of the great General Leo.
Why wouldn't I be? We heard some frightful rumors in town that you and Miss Chere were lost in a fire last night.
Leo confessed, and Locke blinked.
We, Is Celes here, too? She's over there,
Leo said, and pointed to Celes, who had turned her attention back to the roses at her feet. Locke gulped, and suddenly felt anxious and warm all over. Leo didn't seem to notice as he turned his attentions onto the espers behind Locke and Chere.
You have made the espers realize our desire for peace.
Leo trailed off, and Chere nodded a bit at this. Leo stepped up to him and offered a hand. Chere looked at Celes and then at Locke, a small smile curling on her lips.
I am General Leo. May I have your name, please? I am called Chere.
Chere sighed and shook his hand.
We have done something inexcusable to your people. And this probably isn't the time or the place to ask for your forgiveness, but... Speak no further,
Leo cried.
It is we who owe you an apology. We hungered for your power. How close we came to reenacting the War of the Magi. We must put this all behind us.
Chere agreed happily. As Leo and Chere went into deep conversation, Celes stood up and walked towards Locke and Chere, who had broken away from Leo and the espers so that they could talk in private. Chere caught eyes with Celes and gave a small nod, turning away from Locke and looking to Strago and Realm, who were squealing excitedly about what was happening. Locke gave Chere a funny look for just walking away from him like that.
Just imagine, a history-shattering peace treaty, being conducted in our little town as we speak.
Strago exclaimed.
We're a part of history.
Realm giggled, and Chere smiled with them as she kept her gaze on Locke. Celes stepped up to the group, and remained silent as Locke nervously turned away from her and addressed the returners.
I believe our job is finally over. I, for one, could use some peace and quiet.
He slightly glanced over at Celes, and was shocked to find her gazing at him with softer eyes, and a concerned smile on her lips. Locke turned to her completely, the presence of Chere and the others fading from his senses as his eyes locked on hers. Leo had told them that he and Celes had heard they were dead. Had Celes worried about him?
Locke?
Celes trailed off, and instinctively, Locke reached out, taking one of her hands in his assuringly. Celes blushed a little as she squeezed his hand and reached up with her free hand, pushing Locke's bandana out of his eyes, resting her fingertips along his hairline and his temple.
Let's return to Vector.
Locke widened his eyes, resting his other hand at her lower back as he continued to keep hold of her hand.
Celes. I'm SOR,
he began, but Celes shook her head, pressing a finger to his lips. Locke stared down at her as she smiled more.
Please. Not another word.
Chere and Strago gave each other knowing looks as they watched the pair silently reconciliate, in their own little world. Suddenly, Realm squirmed a bit and tugged off her hat, letting out an exasperated sigh.
I'm too hot, Grandpa.
Locke and Celes both blinked and blushed in unison as Realm's outburst broke the moment, realizing that everyone had been staring at them. Celes quickly pulled away from Locke and crossed her arms over her chest, turning away as Locke blushed more and shoved his hands into his pockets, staring down at the ground.
Kids!
Strago exclaimed, and everyone let out nervous laughter as Realm began to fan herself with the large hat. Even Leo and Chere had a small chuckle, as well as the other espers. Locke and Celes stole secret gazes at each other, smiling warmly. Suddenly, the ground began to shake violently, causing the laughter to cease as 4 Magitech armor units thumped and crashed their way into Thamasa, each piloted by an Imperial soldier. Kefka arrived behind them, laughing insanely as the armors proceeded to block each exit out of the town.
He he he. How about a lil Magitech mayhem?
Leo gasped and pushed past Yura, running up to Kefka.
Kefka! What are you doing? I thought you were supposed to be in jail.
Kefka looked as if Leo had just said the most absurd thing on earth, and burst out into more laughter.
Gee ha ha ha! Emperor's orders! I'm to bring the magicite remains of these espers to His Excellency. Behold! A magicite motherlode!
Kefka opened his arms, and all the espers gasped out in fear, 2 of them freaking out and turning to flee. But before they could escape, Kefka cast a spell, causing 3 sparkling stars to strike at the 2 escaping espers and Yura, killing them on the spot. Their bodies flickered and disappeared in a burst of light, their remains becoming magicite crystals that hit the ground.
Idiots!
Kefka giggled, casting another spell to cause the 3 magicites to float up and come to him. Chere gasped and cried out as she watched the magicite fall into his hands.
Yura!
Kefka smirked and began shouting orders to his Magitech pilots.
I don't care for the appearance of this pitiful little hamlet. So burn it!
Relm and Strago gasped, and Leo pointed a finger at Kefka.
Kefka, no! Shut up!
With that, Kefka let out a growl of impatience, and parted his hands. An eerie song began to waft through the city, its high and ear-piercing pitch cutting through the heads of Leo and the returners like a knife. Chere screamed and covered her ears, falling to her knees.
What is this? I can't control my body.
Strago moaned, collapsing to the ground in a dead faint.
Grand Pa!
Relm whimpered, falling on top of him.
Ah!
Celes gasped, and with that, fell to the ground as well, sliding her eyes closed.
My body feels numb.
Moments later, Locke fell too, as well as Leo. Kefka burst out into hysterical laughter as he clung onto his magicite, watching as his Magitech units began stomping about the town, crashing and burning everything they came into contact with.
This is rich!
Kefka smiled, and with that, shoved the magicite shards into his grossly oversized pockets hanging down from his robes.
To think, the mighty returners and precious General Leo have finally met their ends, all by means of a sleep spell. Gah ha 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 ha!
He shook his head and walked over to the fallen bodies, giving each one last dirty glare.
You! Celes Chere! You were nothing but a lying, filthy bitch. Thinking you could be anything outside of the Empire.
Kefka smirked and kneeled down, roughly tugging on a lock of her hair.
If I weren't short on time, I'd make that pretty little head my personal trophy.
With that, Kefka turned and glared down at Locke, spitting at the ground near his head.
How would you like that, you little punk? You're lower than the dirt you're choking on as we speak. Where is your precious King Figaro and returners now when you need them the most? Lowly bastard!
Looking past Relm and Strago, he stared down at Leo and Chere, shivering slightly as he curled his lips into a sadistic smile.
You were both fools. No matter how far you ran, Chere, you would never be able to escape me. I owned your ass, remember? Do you? Did you think things would change if you revolted against me? Did you think you would actually win? Aha! Ha! Ha 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 ha! And you? Leo. Ugh, I don't even want to get into what a dumbass you were. You'll never know. You'll never know what your true purpose was. But that's alright. That's one little secret I don't mind keeping for myself. He. He.
Suddenly, Leo let out a slight moan, and opened his eyes, only to see Kefka staring down at him. The sight of the clown's face chilled the very soul within him, making it feel as if he had woken up beneath a blanket of ice. He felt dizzy, and weak all over, but at least he was alive. Not hearing anything Kefka had said previously, Leo immediately climbed to his feet and drew his sword, shakily getting into combat position. He was willing to do what was necessary, even if it meant killing a fellow Imperial officer. Kefka smiled to himself and pressed his hands together, sliding his tongue over his painted lips as he raised his gaze to that of the battered general. Perhaps Leo would find out the truth sooner than he imagined.
Kefka!
Leo cried, clutching his crystal blade tightly.
Your behavior is dishonorable. I cannot allow this. Ha!
Kefka laughed.
Bring it on, pretty boy.
With that, Leo let out a full frontal assault, before Kefka could even lift a finger to cast a spell. Initiating his special attack, Shock, Leo could dash about Kefka in such a blinding speed, that not even the closest beholder could tell the difference between the blur of Leo's figure and his shadow. Laser-pink energy beams emitted from the blade of his sword as he struck over and over, hitting Kefka from every possible angle. It was now made obvious why Leo had always been known as the strongest of the Imperial generals. His strength, not scientifically enhanced like Celes's and Kefka's, was extraordinary, almost inhuman. Finally, however, his stamina finally gave out, and the general stepped a few paces back from Kefka, shuddering as he watched the light in Kefka's eyes burn out, turning them a dull blue before he collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Sheathing his sword, Leo took a deep breath, but suddenly choked when he took another look at Kefka's body. Not a streak of blood anywhere.
Ha 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 ha.
Suddenly, Kefka's body disappeared into thin air. However, Leo could still feel his evil aura floating nearby, feeling as if it would consume his body and possess his senses at any moment. Shivering, Leo looked about him, but only found the still bodies of the returners at his feet. Despite the reality of the events surrounding him, Leo still felt as if he had entered some sort of twisted trance, a dream that he couldn't escape from by pinching himself. Something just didn't feel right in the air.
Ah! Leo. Always the consummate soldier. Where are you, Kefka?
Leo cried, quickly losing his cool.
Show yourself. EMPERORGESTAHL. I need you here.
Suddenly, in a soft cloud of foggy smoke, Emperor Gestal appeared, only a few feet from Leo. Leo gasped and fell to his knees in a respective bow, lowering his head. Was it an illusion? A hallucination? No, it was truly Gestal. It had to have been. Leo was sure of it.
My liege!
Leo cried, and Gestal looked down at him, concern filling his eyes.
Leo.
Gestal trailed off, and looked away.
I'm sorry I deceived even you, Leo. My purpose has been to gather magicite, and grow powerful, while your purpose had been to assist me in gaining the power and time to do so. Please understand me.
Leo widened his eyes and gasped, jerking his head up and staring at the Emperor unbelievingly. Meanwhile, his insides had seemingly frozen into ice. His mind went numb, and he could barely find the strength to part his lips and reply.
But, Emperor, do not say anything. I understand how you feel. I truly do. Yowee hee hee.
Kefka squealed, somewhere in the background.
That's right. What we have to do now is collect the magicite.
Leo shook his head and stood up, resting a hand over his breast.
But my liege, what is it that I have been fighting for all this time? Was it not for the greater good, to reshape the world into a greater haven where magic could be once more at the fingertips of people, where life would be easier? Medical cures would be rediscovered and applied to the sick and dying. Electric appliances would be supplied power from our own fingertips. There would be no more dangerous and hard labor. No more destroying of the environment with our coal-burning machines. The wonders of magitech technology could be seen through the armors that you, yourself created. You said that the returners were our enemies. That they wanted to corrupt our people's dreams. But you lied. To me. To Celes. To everyone. We were merely pawns.
Suddenly, Gestal put on a slick smile, and crossed his arms over his chest.
Leo, I'd like you to take a nice, long snooze. Very long. Mwahaha.
Leo widened his eyes as Gestal's voice suddenly took on a higher, more familiar tone. In the blink of an eye, Gestal disappeared, and was replaced by Kefka.
So?
Kefka giggled, and twirled a loose strand of blonde hair around his finger.
You think you hit me before? That was simply my shadow. And how did you like my Gestal? I should have been on the stage. Hee hee hee. Well, General? What did you think?
Leo bit down on his lip and shook his head slowly, taking a few steps back. What was real, what was fake? He couldn't tell anymore. His mind was drowning in a sea of confusion and illusion. Was he losing it? Kefka smiled sweetly and took a step towards Leo, sliding a long, slender blade from the depths of his robes as he did so.
You're such a goody two-shoes. Shut up, Kefka.
Leo spat hatefully.
I oughta. Oh.
Kefka squealed, pretending to be drawn back by the comment.
A threat? You're such a violent little brute.
Kefka shook his head slowly and licked his lips.
I'll tell your liege that I had to exterminate a traitor.
Before Leo could utter another word, Kefka took a flying leap, landing a kick right at Leo's jaw. The stunned general stumbled and fell to the ground, gasping for breath as Kefka leaned over him, smiling evilly.
Kefka!
Leo gasped, closing his eyes for a moment.
Please. Open your eyes. It doesn't have to be this way. Oh, but I'm afraid it does.
With a swift motion of his sword, Kefka let out a peal of laughter and plunged the blade into the general's chest, burying it deep within his body as he cackled louder and twisted the sword a bit, shivering in delight as he watched Leo cry out and twitch all over. As blood poured out of the fresh wound and dripped down Leo's clothes, Kefka pulled out the sword and stabbed again, over and over until blood would spray out of the wounds with each removal of the blade and splash at his cheeks and lips. Laughing manically, Kefka licked at his lips, savoring the salty, sweet taste of Leo's blood and his ultimate victory. Throwing the sword aside, Kefka wiped off his cheeks with his gloved hands and gave Leo's destroyed body a hard kick with his boot, causing it to lifelessly flop over in its own pool of blood. Kefka turned away from the defeated soldier, and let out a low whistle.
Hate! Hate! Hate!
Looking about him, Kefka could see that the returners were still out cold. However, now was not the time to finish them off. There were other matters to attend to, first.
Whoa! Yes!
Kefka exclaimed to himself, raising his bloodied hands in the air.
I feel some incredible magic power here, today. Wave after wave of pure, magical energy. He.
Meanwhile, at the sealed gate.
Hurry! We haven't much time. They've already gotten to Yura. Let's go.
The espers that had managed to escape Thamasa alive had flown back frantically to the sealed gate, knowing that true danger was upon them as they watched their leader and two friends die. Banging on the doors, they cried out and pleaded for their other friends to join them, so that they may all defeat Kefka together. The seal upon the gate doors was shattered once more, and dozens of espers began to pour out, all calling out orders to each other as they made their way to Thamasa for battle. Kefka noticed them as soon as they flew over town, laughing delightedly at their determination and sheer energy that their forms emitted. He placed his hands on his hips and glared up at the sky where they were circling over him.
I'd say you're all charged up, boys and girls. Or whatever.
He smirked at his own joke and continued on.
Say, remind me to show you my magicite collection someday. You might see a few familiar faces.
He giggled and placed his hands together.
Now for a little magicite hocus pocus. Let's see what you got, lil espers.
Kefka released the same sparkling magic light spell as before, which struck two espers and instantly transformed them into magicite. It flew into his hands, and the espers let out a shriek of rage at this action. Kefka shook his head and pointed up into the sky.
You wanna take me on? Fine. Here I am.
With that, Kefka began unleashing chain after chain of spells, while the espers began their own offensive attacks. However, none of their spells seemed to affect Kefka whatsoever. In fact, he only seemed to absorb them and grow more powerful. Sick of playing games, Kefka snorted and destroyed 5 espers at once, drawing their magicite to him and almost immediately after killing another 5.
Oh! They're warm to the touch. What treasures!
However, the espers were not finding it easy to fight back. With none of their spells working, and not being able to get close enough for hand-to-hand combat, their options became severely limited. Finding that they were backing off, Kefka grew even angrier and let out a violent shriek.
This is ridiculous! I had no idea you were such wimps. Time to put a stop to all this.
With that final comment, Kefka cast his largest spell yet, striking the final 7 espers that remained. Their magicite remains gathered with their new master, and Kefka let out multiple shrieks of laughter as he shoved them in his robes and began to skip out of town, signaling for his Magitek troops to follow, even though they had not even come close to finishing their dirty work. This, in turn, allowed Thamasa, and the returners, to be spared.
Phew!
Kefka panted, wiping his forehead as he proceeded to march out of the town.
I think I have plenty of magicite for the time being. That is, until I make my way through your precious sealed gate.
He giggled and pulled out a shimmering magicite shard, holding its warmth to his cheek as he closed his eyes and let out a soft sigh.
I don't believe this. Mwahahaha.
30. The beginning of the end, Atma weapon. Chapter end.